In the 1960s, the Bronx borough of New York City was not known for its sandy beaches, pristine lakes, or flowing brooks. This was a landscape smothered in concrete, asphalt, and brick. For a young boy named Jim Sanaki, it seemed an unlikely place for water to seep into his life and forever shape his future. He was the oldest child of Alma and James Sanaki. His father, a high school dropout, struggled to support his wife and 4 kids in this impoverished community.
My dad was trying to make a living. He would sell cars, deliver milk. That was in the days when you could still get the milkman to put bottles on your doorstep in the city. He would do stuff like that.
He was everything: construction, numbers, bartender. He was everything. He worked.
The family rarely saw their dad, but as they would find out, it was not all work and no play.
Well, he was a womanizer. Used to go for weeks, I didn't see him. Bring me money and go. I had to stay home. I was afraid of him. If I wasn't home, I used to get beat up. And I used to drink myself to death. Take care of the kids, cook. I wasn't such a great mother.
On October 13th, 1966, everything came tumbling down.
My mother was really pissed off. She said, "I bet it was that bitch he was with," you know? I was like, ooh.
We had an affair, and the husband shot her. Her husband.
Jim was just 11 years old at the time, yet he still remembers every detail with boyish pride of his father's valiant struggle.
So this guy comes through the window, right? He points a gun at my father. He shoots my father. My father gets up, picks up a table, breaks it over this guy's head. The guy goes down. My father leaves the apartment, goes down 3 flights of stairs, collapses in front of a brownstone on Amsterdam Avenue and dies.
One bullet had struck his chest, piercing both his left lung and heart. The second shot ripped through his neck. Jim's father was just 28 years old when he was murdered. The outlook was bleak for the family he left behind in one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City. Social Security was now their only means of support, and Alma sank deeper into the throes of alcoholism.
I took it real hard. Then I had an excuse to drink more. You know what I mean? Just to numb me. But you wake up to the same story, same thing.
Help for the children soon arrived from Alma's father-in-law. Although he could not provide much financial assistance, his spiritual contribution was enormous.
My grandfather came over and spent more time with us and thus became like our dad.
Jim's grandfather did not want the psychological trauma of their father's murder to lead the children astray. He knew they could be vulnerable to the destructive forces of the neighborhood and needed a diversion. Of all places, he found his answer in the local library. It was an instructional book on swimming. Knowing nothing about the sport, he educated himself so he could train his 2 grandsons to swim well enough to get on a community swim team.
His grandfather took him and his brother and used to train them during the rec hours with people in the way, and they used to go back and forth, back and forth.
As the boys saw their skills improve, their enthusiasm grew. But their grandfather knew there was a limit to what he could offer from reading books. He lit the fire, but now he needed someone to stoke the flame. That someone was Marcelino Rodriguez, a local swimming coach.
I met Jimmy when he was about 10 years old, and his grandfather asked me whether I would give him a tryout. And really, I used to take almost anybody who wanted to be on the team. It didn't matter whether they could swim very well at the time.
The team was Marcelino's creation. It was an anomaly in the South Bronx, a community ravaged by crime and whose urban landscape featured few places to swim.
And you have to understand, this was like a ragtime little team of Hispanic, blacks, and a mix of all a bunch of kids from the South Bronx, and we had different color bathing suits. So we didn't look like a team, but sure enough, looked good in the water when they hit the water. And the grandfather would come every day and bring them, and eventually offered to help. And I said, geez, I could use all the help because I'm doing this by myself.
The boy's grandfather was elated to become the assistant coach. This allowed him to remain close to his two grandsons and watch them develop into competitive swimmers under Marcelino's skilled guidance. Jim did not have the characteristic lanky physique of a swimmer, but he found ways to compensate.
Invariably, he'd be in the center lane, which is the lane for the fastest swimmer the qualifiers, the fastest qualified. But he'd be flanked by two guys that are much taller than him. But he was a windmill, he'd go in and everything he did with perfection,
Jim and his brother Victor displayed uncharacteristic discipline for boys of that age. They weren't even teenagers yet, but swimming was becoming an obsession. For Jim, only one thing stood in his way. He was seeing less and less of his best friend Reuben.
Couldn't swim to save my life, so Jimmy would train me. He trained me back and forth in the pool during the recreation hours. And when he thought I was good enough, he brought me to the coach and asked me if I could try out. And the coach, he said, well, if you can take a workout, you can stay.
Reuben survived the rigorous workout and made the team.
And I don't think Reuben really wanted to swim at the time. He was just going along because Jimmy told him you had to come. As a matter of fact, there were several occasions when Reuben wanted to quit, but Jimmy always would talk him into coming back and staying.
Swimming became an emotional refuge for Jim. Still, he could not escape the painful reality of his mother's drinking problem. He was the oldest child and had no other choice but to step into the role of surrogate parent.
And Jimmy came to me one day and said, he must have been about 13 or 14. He says, I don't want to be in charge of the house. And he says, I want to be a kid. And he was told that he had no choice. His grandfather said, someone has to be in charge there because your mother really can't do it.
He took over we had to listen to him. In other words.
Actually, we saw him as the man of the house, but he was more of the tyrant of the house. We were intimidated by him. He was very strict, he was our disciplinary, whereas our grandparents were more the affectionate. They supported us and gave us the love. And I think it was just difficult for Jimmy because he needed to be the disciplinary at that point, because he needed to make sure that we were okay. And I understand that now, but when I was small, I didn't.
He used to pick me up at the bar sometimes. Oh, come on, you had enough, come on. You bring me home, put me to bed.
Alma even found it difficult to bring a man home from the local taverns because the precocious boy would be up and waiting at the door.
He used to wait for me, and if anybody brought me upstairs, you can't come in. He used to say, you can't come in. You brought her home, you're not coming in. Both of them, Victor and Jimmy.
I'll never forget the day he came in, and he came in late, and he was really tired looking, and I said, Jim, why you look so beat? He said, we had a tough night last night. I said, what was the problem? He said, Ma brought somebody home, and we had, Victor and I, we got the baseball bat, and we had to chase him out, and we had to stay awake because we were afraid he may come back, and it was a tough time for Jim.
The inner strength he exhibited when faced with hardship or adversity made his friends feel more secure in his company.
I always felt with Jimmy I always felt safe. Even if I thought we were going to have a problem with somebody, they became his friends in like 5 minutes.
It's a funny thing when you walk through guys that are in gangs and that carry guns. We were kind of like respected for swimming and for going to school.
The people in the neighborhood began to realize, I think, that we were gonna be somebody. We started bringing home trophies and medals from the swimming thing we were doing.
The initiative of Jim's grandfather would now pay dividends beyond championship medals. Their achievements in the pool helped get all three boys into college. Jim and Victor swam for Colgate University and Reuben for City College of New York. College was their ticket out of the ghetto, and swimming helped pay the fare.
Jim graduated in 1976 and was offered an entry-level position at IBM.
The job required long hours, but Jim still found time to coach swimming at the City College of New York and to work as an ocean lifeguard on weekends.
He was very ambitious. He was an overachiever. And you couldn't say no to him. So he wasn't the type of person to give up on anything. We once had a situation where we were at Reese Beach and we were lifeguards. Bad heavy surf. There were 3 people way out. They were drowning. It wasn't even our call. We were on one of the side chairs, a jetty chair. And he blew the whistle and he went in. It was dangerous. It was very dangerous. We shouldn't have went out the way we went out. There were boats going out to help in this rescue. And he went out swimming, and I had to watch him. Then I went in. And again, if he could go out there swim, and as long as he was out there, I know it's okay out there with him. And we saved 2 people's lives, but we lost 1 person. But that's the type of person he is. He'll never give up. If he sees something wrong, he's gonna ride it.
1 year after graduation, Jim had moved out of the Bronx, and he was anxious to get his remaining family out. The neighborhood was only getting worse, and his mother had no intention of dealing with her alcoholism. It was a terrible environment for his 2 teenage sisters. Although he wasn't making a great deal of money, it was time to throw them a lifeline. Jim decided to rent a modest townhouse in a quiet suburb just north of the city that could accommodate the entire family. He felt the move might even help his mother. But Alma would hear nothing of it and refused to leave. Without any authority to do so, Jim removed his 2 sisters, and his mother took no legal action to stop him.
But they had a hard time. The girls were crying all the time on the phone. Ma, come live with us, come live with us. But Jimmy took over. I couldn't say anything. He says, I want to take care of my girls, and that was it. I'm going to take them out of the neighborhood. It's no good for them, and you're drinking, and something could happen to the girls.
It was a harsh decision, but I think it was the best decision at the point, at that point in time. I'm kind of glad it happened because I don't even know where I would be at this point.
3 years after Jim removed his 2 sisters from the Bronx, the family seemed to be doing relatively well. Jim remained at IBM, Victor was teaching, and the 2 girls were attending college. His mother, however, still refused to leave the Bronx.
Then tragedy struck again. It was New Year's Eve, 1980. Jim was coaching his City College swim team at an event in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He was getting married on the same trip since his fiancée's family lived on the island.
My sister and I were invited to Puerto Rico because Jimmy was coaching City College, and at the same time he was preparing for a wedding. And so we all flew down there.
This was our first actually family vacation. So we were excited, happy. Jimmy was going to actually have a civil marriage down in Puerto Rico because that's where his fiance's family was from.
I ended up at the beach because after practice in the morning with the City College swimming team, the group would divide off and go sightseeing. So this time was my turn to take as assistant swimming coach. I took a group of the guys and we were going to go body surfing.
Jim's 2 sisters joined the group. They all went to Condado Beach, where the sand bottom was ideal for body surfing.
But its shifting sandbars made the surf more unpredictable.
And my sister and my brother Jimmy and a few other friends, they were all riding the waves.
And it was just after a storm and the water was rough. So I go out and caught a wave trying to ride it in all the way to the shore. And I decided to do a flip turn in order to go back out and catch another one.
The flip turn is a maneuver to escape the forward motion of a wave. The body surfer leans forward, digging his head and torso down into the water in a tumble roll, allowing the wave to pass overhead.
As I was in the tumble with my head down, another wave broke on top of my back and threw me into the sand.
I didn't see anything, but I heard this big commotion. And they said, someone's hurt, someone's hurt.
He was face down in the water, and I was yelling at him. I'm like, Jimmy, get up, come on, stop playing around.
At that point, I couldn't get up or turn my head or anything, and I was about to drown. Finally, she picked me up. When she picked me up, she later told me that I gasped for air. I was sort of like blue in the face. And as soon as she turned me over, I told her, I said, Debbie, I broke my back, get some help.
The water in a Bronx pool had given a couple of ghetto kids the means to swim out of poverty. Now, at age 25, water again shaped Jim's future, but this time with a tragic twist. With one crash of a wave, Jim's world was swept away.
I panicked a little because I never saw my brother in such a helpless state before, like that.
The quintessential doer was now totally dependent on others.
I got in the ambulance and we got to the hospital, and it was an unbelievable scene. People with knife wounds, sitting in the hallway bleeding, and they roll us into a room, and we had to cut off his bathing suit, and his hose down. He had sand on. They weren't going to move him. They just had to leave him still.
The San Juan Hospital was far below the standards of most facilities on the U.S. mainland. And because it was New Year's Eve, the emergency room was grossly understaffed. There was only one resident doctor on call that night. Marcelino had to double as a hospital aide, wheeling Jim's gurney around the facility.
And there was nothing you could do, no matter how much you yelled, no matter how much you carried on, they weren't going to pay attention, because they've heard that before. And we were not accustomed to dealing with a situation like that in a hospital.
It is now universally accepted that prompt and effective treatment following a spinal cord injury to reduce swelling can greatly diminish the degree of permanent damage. Incredibly, Jim languished in the emergency room most of the night before a radiologist even read his x-rays. Whether quicker and better care would have helped Jim's particular case is a matter of conjecture.
And they put the x-rays up on I don't know what they call them, but just to examine the x-ray, and the radiologist says, oh my God. And I said, what's the matter? It doesn't really look good.
I asked the doctor, I said, I could handle not walking, but will I get back my hands? And he said no. At that point, I started crying, because I couldn't move my arms, but I knew that if I could at least use my hands and arms, I would be a lot better to get through life.
Although Jim was conscious and acutely concerned about the extent of his paralysis, the reality was he may not survive at all. He had completely shattered his fifth cervical vertebrae in his neck, and shards of bone were lodged around his spinal cord. To leave these fragments untouched would mean certain death. Emergency surgery was the only course of action, and it had to be done before Jim could be moved to a better hospital. His fiancée requested that they be married first.
She still wanted to marry him, and he said no. He didn't want to get married at that point. He didn't know how he was going to end up.
Jim finally relented, and in a somewhat paradoxical ceremony, they were married. Then, Jim was read his last rites. Now married, Jim was rushed into the operating room to undergo the very risky procedure. Each bone fragment had to be painstakingly removed from his spinal canal. The slightest misstep could cause even greater paralysis or kill him. The doctors also removed a portion of his hip and fused it into his spinal column to fill the gap left by the crushed vertebrae. Jim would survive the delicate 12-hour procedure, and the surgery was considered successful. Unfortunately, the level of Jim's care did not improve much in the post-operative ward, at least not until his employer, IBM, came to his aid.
Jim had been with this immense global company for just 4 years and was not in a highly visible position. Yet the circumstances of his terrible accident filtered all the way up to IBM's most senior management. The chairman's office responded immediately. Their San Juan branch was instructed to do whatever was necessary to ensure Jim had the best possible care.
The branch manager, Puerto Rico, came in and told my my fiance at the time that if you need money for any reason, go to the Puerto Rico branch office and just ask for cash. We had to pay private nurses, and in that hospital things weren't given to you freely, so we had to buy like special medical equipment with cash. And eventually the doctors came over to me when I was laid out in my hospital bed right now and said, "Jim, who the heck are you?" Because I was getting so much attention from IBM, and IBM was, pressure is not the right word, but showed their concern to the hospital staff and even to the governor of Puerto Rico to take care of this IBM guy. At the end of the stay, IBM hired a private jet at the order of the chairman of the company, and they flew me home on a private Learjet.
After returning from Puerto Rico, Jim entered the Rusk Institute at New York University's Medical Center for Rehabilitation. His close friend Reuben was in the Air Force at the time of Jim's accident. Unable to get leave to visit him in Puerto Rico, he saw Jim for the first time just days after his arrival in New York.
I knew I had to be strong, so I didn't cry or anything. I didn't want him to think I thought it was really bad or that we couldn't handle it. And I walk into the room, and he's got this thing on it. It's called a halo. He's got 4 screws in his head, and it really shocked me, and it was hard to take.
The halo vest is custom fitted to the patient's head and torso. 4 screws are literally drilled into the skull. Proper alignment of the spine is absolutely critical during the healing process, and this device is the best means of ensuring that. Patient comfort has to be a secondary consideration. What little movement Jim had after his accident, this device took away. Jim would have to spend 3 agonizing months in this rigid position. The powerful bonds that linked Jim and Reuben would now be put to the ultimate test.
If he didn't get much better, he wanted me to pull the plug, basically. And he made me swear to it.
Jim's accident surely put into perspective both the deceptive power of the ocean and just how fragile our bodies can be. For Jim, as well as his friends and family, it was the capricious nature of the accident that haunted them most.
When this happened to him, I really was angry at, like anyone would be, I guess, at God. I didn't understand why this happened to somebody like him. And it really made me realize how fragile life was, and that at any time, in any moment, anything could be taken away from us.
Rehabilitation at the Rusk Institute was a low point for Jim. It was here that he had to accept the grim reality that he was permanently disabled and the cruel consequences that lay ahead.
I went through 7 months of rehabilitation, a very difficult time, but it taught me how to take care of myself with my disability.
One of Jim's foremost concerns was how he would control his bodily functions, specifically his bowel and bladder. It would be one of the most dehumanizing parts of his rehabilitation, but he knew he could not function in mainstream society unless he could manage them.
The great majority of paraplegic and quadriplegic patients can manage their bowels in a fairly regular way. Sometimes they only need to take a cathartic either once a day or once every other day, or some people actually have to put their finger in their rectum and digitally stimulate themselves.
People commonly think that paralysis causes both the bowel and bladder to flow uncontrollably. But like the bowels, the bladder can do just the opposite. It can actually obstruct the flow of urine. And this blockage can have serious, sometimes fatal consequences.
And so what happens is the bladder starts to fill up, the bladder contracts, it's contracting against a sphincter muscle that's closed. And that closed sphincter muscle creates a condition where the pressure inside of the bladder gets very, very high. That pressure in the bladder causes back pressure to the kidneys, and it affects the kidneys.
There are two basic surgical methods of dealing with a blocked sphincter muscle. One is to remove the blockage. The other is to bypass it altogether and drain the bladder through a catheter in the abdomen. Jim elected to do the former, to cut through the muscle in a surgical procedure called a sphincterotomy.
So now what happens is when the bladder starts to contract because the sphincter is wide open, the urine just leaks out. We then put a condom catheter over the penis. This is like a regular condom attached to a tube, which attaches to a bag that the patient usually wears on his leg, and the urine is stored on the leg.
Rehabilitation also applied to Jim's living quarters. Tens of thousands of dollars would have to be invested over time to make his home fully accessible. And if Jim decided to relocate, the whole process would begin again. On top of that, thousands of dollars were required to purchase a motorized wheelchair, and a customized van cost roughly double the amount of a conventional vehicle. Both the wheelchair and the van took advantage of the fact that Jim could still move his arms. Although his hands are completely paralyzed and frozen in a closed fist,
Jim operates the wheelchair by slipping one of his hands over a joystick and similar hand controls in his van.
Other quadriplegics with even greater paralysis could never dream of doing what Jim can do. And yet, while affording Jim a great deal of independence, his mobility masks some of his limitations.
For instance, Jim has difficulty sitting upright without straps around his torso to hold him in place. With no upper body control and limited strength in his arms, he might otherwise topple over and fall to the ground.
After 7 months of rehabilitation, Jim returned to Rockland County with his wife Anna. When Jim was able-bodied, he put no limits on his dreams. Now the physical and financial obstacles seemed insurmountable. Even the most rudimentary goals, like getting out of bed, required assistance.
I wake up at 6 in the morning and I want to get up and I can't. So that's frustrating for me. And I had to learn to let people take care of me. I had to learn how to let people help without feeling badly. I had to learn how to let different nurses come in and see me naked and help me with my private personal needs. So that was something I had to do because it is, you're a man, you have an ego, you take care of yourself, you used to shower by yourself. I can't do that anymore.
He tells me, see, I don't know if he tells other people this, but when he lays down and when he's in bed, see, he thinks about it, and it kills him that he's in this situation. It really hurts, but he won't show you that. And it kills me when I leave him in the bed and I have to walk out of there.
His dependency on others was unbearable. One telephone call helped change all that.
After 7 months of therapy, my IBM manager called me and said, "Jim, how would you like to return to work?" And I said to him, "Are you kidding? I can't do anything. I don't know what I can do anymore." I was amazed that they would even consider it.
In May of 1982, just 2 years after his accident, Jim ambivalently returned to work.
I had no idea what it would be like. My confidence was shot. I didn't know how well I would be able to compete with able-bodied people. It was a new game.
Hard work and perseverance soon paid off when Jim was promoted to editor of one of IBM's internal magazines.
I was getting very good at what I was being asked to do. So in terms of work-related confidence, that was coming back again.
Jim going back to work, it really helped save his life because it made him a productive person again. There's two things very important to Jimmy. One is working, and one is providing for his family.
Just a couple of workplace modifications helped Jim to be very self-sufficient around the office. But back home was dramatically different. There, his needs were far more diverse. Anyone seeing Jim at work couldn't imagine what it took just to get there. It could demand upwards of 3 hours of dedicated help before he even left the house. He had to be given a sponge bath and be dressed in bed. A hoist was required just to get him to his wheelchair. He needed assistance with his bowel and urinary functions. Private nursing care was essential, which took away what little intimacy was left in his marriage, and the financial burden was colossal. The finances would likely get worse, since many insurance companies place a $1 million cap on medical payments to policyholders who become disabled. Jim and Anna felt it was only a matter of time before the money ran out. While work gave Jim a sense of purpose, his home life was a daily reminder of his helplessness and vulnerability. He became bitter and withdrawn, and his already fragile marriage was dying a slow death.
Jimmy became angry, which you can expect. But instead of embracing Anna and loving her, I think he pushed her away because Anna became more of a caretaker than he did his wife.
Anna had to do it all. She had to be all, do all. So you know what happened? She burnt out. It was too much. And then Jimmy was also cold. I mean, he didn't want to look at her as like a woman again right now. He wasn't ready for that.
5 years after being married in a San Juan hospital, Jim and Anna were divorced. He had experienced his first major setback that he attributed to his disability. He felt very alone. His wife left, his siblings were grown, his mother was estranged, even his inspirational grandfather had recently passed away.
My confidence was shot. I was just a useless, person. I felt, and all I had to focus on was my work. And meeting Maggie, she gave me confidence in dating. She saw what my frailties were. They were right there in the open. So I felt that what she saw was what she'd get, and we just dealt from that point on. That was all we could ask for, because she was overcoming a lot just by walking next to me with people staring and making
I really became more sensitized to what disabled people go through just walking down the street with Jim. And I thought, boy, look at all these people are just staring at us. And then if we drove anywhere, when he got out on the lift on the van, they just stopped.
At IBM, things were not much different.
Anytime somebody rolls up to you in a wheelchair, a person who tells you that that doesn't matter probably isn't being completely honest with you. There is an initial reaction that you've got to work through.
The severity of Jim's disability made people uncomfortable, at least initially. They didn't know how to react and therefore were reluctant to get too close unless work required it. This had a lot to do with Jim becoming somewhat isolated within the employee community. Maggie was a co-worker of Jim's and saw this firsthand.
Well, I heard a lot of people would say, well, Jim is not, he keeps to himself. Why doesn't Jim come to lunch with us? I'd say, well, he likes to eat by himself. And I found out later, nobody even asked him. I'd say, Jim, is it true you don't want to come to lunch with us? He goes, no. And I said, well, why don't you join us for lunch? The whole department's going. Come with us. Come eat with us.
The real reason was because I stuck my face in the bowl when I ate.
No.
Like a dog. Well, give me more spaghetti.
Yeah, but then when we went down to the cafeteria, people would like really stare. It was like those
Tell them the story about the woman.
Piercing stares they would like.
The woman that asked you about, how much do they pay you?
Oh, I carried Jim's tray down for lunch. After a while, it became a routine, and we would go to lunch every day, and then we'd eat with the department, and we were sitting I'd bring Jim's tray every day. He'd order a sandwich, I'd get his milk or coffee, whatever he wanted, and I'd carry it to the table. And he'd sit on the end where he can get his wheelchair in. And then one of the women from the other department said, "Maggie, that's so nice of you. Does IBM pay you extra money?"
Maggie grew increasingly frustrated by people's misconceptions and their general uneasiness around Jim. Yet she had behaved the same way when they first met.
First time I saw Jim, he was driving by, and I looked up, and there he was, like his head was the same height as mine. And I thought, oh, here's a nice looking man, but it's too bad he's in a wheelchair. And I said to him, "Oh boy, you're cute," because I was a little shocked. And he said, "Oh, dogs are cute." And he just drove away.
If she saw a cute, able-bodied guy walk up past her desk, would she say, "Oh, you're cute, standing up in those brown loafers"? Well,
no, I probably wouldn't have said anything.
So my answer was right away, "Oh, dogs are cute." I felt like I was being patronized again, and I had like patronization up to here. So I was angry. I was a little bit. I'm less angry now than I was 10 years ago when I met Maggie and 15 years ago when I was first hurt.
In 1988, Jim and Maggie were married. Maggie had a 5-year-old daughter from her previous marriage. Jim would now have to fill the role of family man, while Maggie faced the personal side of living with a quadriplegic.
The upside with Jim, the positives in our relationship far outweigh the negatives. There's very few negatives. The negatives parts are I have to do all the physical aspects of the relationship. It's things that we take for granted that I have to do for Jim that he can't do for himself. And I said to Jim, he goes, "Don't you ever get tired of this, Maggie?" I said, "No, I don't. And I really don't, because I really, truly love him." Jim takes on the extra burden of being the sole provider for the family. And he's a very caring, very loving, very supportive person as a husband and as a father. And I couldn't ask for anything better than that.
The collapse of Jim's first marriage had stripped away any self-esteem he had left after his accident. His new relationship with Maggie restored that and much, much more. He was beginning to act like he had no disability at all.
Tommy, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
How's things?
Good. Hanging in there. What can I do?
He regained the full measure of his confidence, and with it, his aggressive nature returned. He now set his sights on moving up the corporate ladder. There was no physical barrier that could stand in his way. But the most formidable of all obstacles remained, the barriers of the mind. Jim could not get promoted without convincing his superiors that he could handle even more responsibility. He thought that some senior managers might be reluctant to add to the overwhelming physical burden he already carried.
I think I have to work harder in order to prove myself, in order to get the positions. See, now that we got a structure that works with stuff in it, what's going to be the difference? What I hope the difference is intellectual capital. And, you've got to be smarter than the next guy, I think. Now, if they're going to hire you for image and how you look, I got a tough road to haul.
Jim's first significant career opportunity came in 1991. IBM was in the process of implementing radical changes to its corporate culture and downsizing its workforce. Internal communications was essential in bringing about this transformation, and Jim was being considered to manage that function for all of IBM in North America. Joan Seavey was the executive in charge.
He just came flying into my office. With every question I asked him, he had 62 ideas that he was running with a mile a minute. I had trouble keeping up with him. And I said, my God, I was going to put limitations on this guy that he doesn't put on himself. And so he sold me. He just really sold me that he could be the strongest member of this team and that he was just had the work ethic and the motivation to do what needed to be done.
I think of obstacles in terms of solutions, getting over obstacles. I don't think in terms of, gee, I can't use my fingers, so how do I get the report done?
And I began to realize that the very things that he had to get through when he became disabled were the very things that were going to get him through in other settings. And so I began to see Jim as a problem solver rather than as a problem.
I have the calendar and the major projects list. Let's get that filled up. If there's a bottleneck on the admin side, tell me and I'll fix it.
He's the guy on the point for communicating to all employees in that organization. He's in a tremendously responsible position, and I think that the company has recognized how good the guy is with the job he's in now.
Throughout Jim's life, he's defied the odds. He moved his family out of the ghetto. In spite of his disability, he climbed up the corporate ladder in one of the world's most competitive companies.
He married a beautiful, intelligent, able-bodied woman. But one challenge seemed insurmountable, even by Jim's standards, and that was fathering a child.
How could it even be considered for a paralyzed male? But here again, as with the common misconceptions of the bowel and urinary functions, what we assume to be true is not always correct.
Most quadriplegics are able to attain an erection. Most cannot have the sensation of orgasm, and some are able to ejaculate and some are not. Of course, ejaculation is the propulsion of semen through the tip of the penis, so you can father children. Some quadriplegics can do that. Others can ejaculate, but the ejaculate or the semen go backwards into the bladder. In either case, it's possible to father children. In the former case, it's just with ordinary sexual relations. In the latter case, we can extract the sperm from the urine, essentially, and use it either for artificial insemination or in vitro insemination.
Opinions vary within the medical community as to the exact probability of a quadriplegic fathering a child. But most would agree that doing it without any artificial means is a formidable challenge. And that's just what Jim and Maggie were determined to do.
I remember him calling me. He said, "Moss." I said, "What's the matter, Jim?" He said, "It happened." I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Boy, I knocked the hell out of the ceiling. It was all over the place. It was flying." I said, "Man," he says, "all these years of backup." He said, "It was coming." I said, "Oh my God, Jimmy." He said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "Well, I can have a child. I know I can have a child."
When Maggie believed she was pregnant, I asked her to take 10 of those quick test pregnancy things.
I took the first one, and then he said, "Take it again." I said, "Jim, I'm pregnant." He said, "No."
Buy it again. I went out and bought
Take
3
it
or 4 of the
again.
kits because I knew they were all wrong. But
Then he came to the gynecologist's office with me, and the gynecologist said, "Oh, she's pregnant." And he said, "No, take it again." He made so I ended up taking like 10 pregnancy tests. I said, "Jim, I'm pregnant."
So I called up my doctor who said I couldn't father a child. And I said, "Doctor, guess what? Maggie's pregnant." He says, "Jim, I told you, stop projecting. She can't get pregnant." I said, "No, she is pregnant." And he goes, "You can't do that. You can't do that." I said, "She is pregnant." He goes, "How'd you do that?" I said, "The old-fashioned way." And there was like silence at the other end of the phone. And then we brought in Jimmy to see him, and he was like, he couldn't believe it. He could not believe it. So, I mean, and
there are misconceptions. People think because he's paralyzed we don't have sex, or they think because he's paralyzed he doesn't work. Hi, hon. Good, how are you? How's work?
good, it was all right. Traffic was tough. I do things, I live.
Till this day, I don't know how he got a kid. I just don't know. I'm afraid to ask him.
My son's a miracle baby as far as I'm concerned, because they said it would never happen. You know what's odd about all that? I have able-bodied couples that can't have children, and they look at me like I'm a freak, because I did have a child, and I'm in a wheelchair.
Can we eat dinner? Soon.
Yeah, what are you doing? So in some cases, I'm envied by people, believe it or not.
In spite of extraordinary efforts on Jim's part, life could never be quite normal, at least by able-bodied standards. There was no way to hide from the children the severity of their father's physical limitations. But without the inhibitions of adults, the children easily adjusted. Life in that respect did become normal.
It's like with anything else. They have frustrations when Jimmy wants to play ball with his dad. And
I can't catch.
And he can't catch, but Jimmy will throw him the ball anyway, and it usually bounces off his chest, or Jim ducks and it goes past his head, and Jimmy gets frustrated. You didn't catch it, you didn't catch it.
His son would mimic him when he was young, and we both sat down and cried because his son was trying to catch the ball with his knuckles closed like Jim would do. But Jim plays hockey with him with the chair. Wow. You know, he'll play ball with him, and he'll find a way around whatever it is.
He can do a lot of things, but not like other dads with 10 fingers and stuff. Well, he has 10 fingers, but he can't move the 10 fingers that he has.
My dad could do practically anything that other dads can do, except like catch a ball or go running, and that's not really important that he can't do that to me.
From his earliest days in the Bronx, Jim seemed to know that you can't improve your situation by dwelling on your shortcomings. Jim is a doer with uncanny resourcefulness. His self-imposed challenges may appear masochistic in light of his overwhelming physical disability. But with each accomplishment, Jim gains a greater sense of fulfillment, confidence, and self-esteem. Those qualities have enabled him to achieve things that many able-bodied people only dream of.
This is a gift. Every day is a gift for me. So I'm beyond my wildest dreams since that day I broke my neck.
Jim is just a person with disabilities whose passion for everything else in life overcomes the disability. The very, very worst thing that he could do for his health is to consider himself a disabled person.
He's always been someone who perseveres, is a good term to use for him. In spite of everything, he perseveres.
I wouldn't trade my life, you know, with anybody else's right now, because I have a great wife, I have a great family. I'm a lucky man.